She thumps a cane and drinks champagne. She's formidable and judgmental, but we can guarantee that she's a quintessential Lady D, but recognizes great potential. What would Danbury do?
Welcome to What Would Danbury Do, your guide to Julia Quinn's Bridgerton series from A to V. Get out your canes, steal your brother's breeches, and turn the Mermaid soundtrack up to 11 because we're going diamond hunting, bitches! Sorry I said bitches, I'm just really amped up. It's the penultimate book in the Bridgerton series, and it's all about Miss Hyacinth Bridgerton. Don't forget, you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram as @BridgertonPod. We love hearing from you. We kind of wish we were finishing on Hyacinth. Instead, we're finishing on fucking Gregory.
Yeah, but we only have 2 weeks until we record Gregory. That'll be all over. So it's 2 weeks and then we're done.
Okay, do we want to do Rudy, Adele, Kate for Hi, My Name Is? Hi.
Yes.
My name is Hi. My name is Hi. My name is Chicken City.
Yeah.
You're welcome. This rap is brought to you by almost a whole bottle of wine.
My name is Violet Bridgerton.
Wow. I hope you guys know that I am using all of that. Hi, my name is Rudy.
Hi, my name is Adele.
Hi, my name is Kate. Today we're on a treasure hunt through It's in His Kiss, written by Julia Quinn and published in 2005 by Avon Books. The dedication to Paul reads, "And for Paul, even though he seems to think I'm the sort of person who likes to share caviar." We're following the youngest Bridgerton sibling and everyone's favorite grammarian, Hyacinth. Set in 1825, It's in His Kiss features the aforementioned Hyacinth and her would-be beau, Gareth St. Clair. Gareth is the favorite grandson of Lady Danbury and the decidedly unfavorite son of Lord Richard St. Clair, whom says...
Grammarian alert.
Who has decided to beggar Gareth and ruin the estate. But don't worry, there's a secret diary, 2 matchmaking mamas, and the greatest piece of fictional theater never to be granted a stage to ensure things don't get too heavy.
Sorry about the hoops, but it is always funny to do that to you.
I feel like we need to put that on top of a Stefan gif from SNL. But don't worry, there's a secret diary, 2 matchmaking mamas.
As much as I say that It's in His Kiss is like, I love it, and it is one that I have loved for a long time. And anytime Adele threw shade on it and I would cut it out, it was because I was like, no, it's good though. But yeah, reading it, I kept being like, oh, it is actually the Duke and I all over again.
I actually enjoyed it more than I remembered, so kudos to you, Rudy.
Yeah.
But it's definitely the book of Julia Quinn's heart. I'm saying that without knowing. I wouldn't be surprised if it didn't take her very long to write compared to the others. It just felt a lot more free.
It's really interesting with this one because I'm the same as you, Adele. Like I don't remember. I remember sort of being about this book when I read it, and it's not one of the ones that I returned to very often. But rereading it now, I think I sent you a message at like 12:30 at night, being like, "Just finished Hyacinth and I loved it," which was unexpected. But it's funny because I remember, so as a young adult, so I was reading these books the first time around when I was sort of in my late teens and like just getting into my early 20s. And I remember relating so hard to Penelope at that time. And now that we've read through them again, like there's still aspects of Penelope that feel very familiar. But I related really strongly to Hyacinth at this point in my life. Like that idea of always being a bit too much, you know, like too smart, too opinionated, too quirky, too out there. And so I felt quite emotional reading through her story for that reason. And I think it might be me with some 20 years of experience after that. It might be me like no longer dating the boys that I was dating when I was a teenager. But I think it might be the current climate as well, like this idea of recognizing women who have diminished themselves to be socially and culturally acceptable, and Hyacinth just not playing into that game. I think that this book feels contemporary and even a little fresh in a way that the other books just haven't up until this point.
It really pays off all those, or the development of the characters at this point. I just loved all these these female relationships, whether it's by blood or by marriage or by friendship. Like that first conversation between Penelope and Hyacinth and Lady Danbury is on fire. Like it's so, I don't want to say this, but perfect. It just makes me really excited, and it has such energy to it. And they're all women who are flawed, but they're really funny and mean and so different from one another. Just having them all together, and then to have them all together at the Smythe Smith, or is it Smith musical, was just joy, because I'm going to say Smythe Smith family just gives me joy as well.
I do think it's kind of funny that, because when we were talking about romancing Mr. Bridgerton, and we did talk about Penelope and Lady Danbury attending the Smythe Smith musicale, and without having to be told, recognizing that the cellist is absolutely miserable. Hyacinth isn't emotionally intelligent enough to clue into that. Like, she hasn't actually worked that out.
I kind of feel like it's always the cellist who knows that they're terrible. Like, the violinists never figure it out.
No, they don't. It's always the cellist.
It's the cellist?
Yeah.
I don't know. There must be some link in there between, I don't know, cellists and a certain level of self-awareness that doesn't exist in violinists.
As someone who knows literally nothing about music, I think it's because the violinist gets to be the star. Oh. And so they really, like, you really get to, like, rock out. And the cellist does actually have to kind of sit back and be aware of what is happening. What
conclusion we've just come to is that Yo-Yo Ma is one of the most self-aware people on the planet.
What I got from it is that if Hyacinth was to play an instrument, she would be a violinist.
I think there's something interesting in the fact that the two first kisses almost immediately follow an interaction with his father, which is spelled out more fully later on in the book. But also that they both have their flash moment of realization after the other person has been really vulnerable with them. They're both characters that are quite confident and push back and really know their boundaries quite well. But it's when they both have those moments of being completely stripped back that the other person recognizes their like or love of the other person. So for Hyacinth, it was her talking about how it was really difficult to love her. And then for Gareth, it was him, some of it, I guess, is a little bit of jealousy that he talks about earlier, like being jealous of Hyacinth's very full life and that he's only got a few more years with one person, the one person that loves him. So they're almost, it's quite mirrored in many ways, but not exactly fit, like it doesn't fit really beautifully, but it does in the overall picture. So I really liked all that character work for sure.
I think that came through really clearly in the scene where Gareth goes to visit Anthony and asks for Hyacinth's hand in marriage, where Anthony like immediately breaks out the good whiskey and he's all like, you know, thank goodness she's off my hands and there's nobody but anyone who could actually handle her. But then he does this complete about face, like she is a goddamn treasure and you will treat her as a treasure or we are going to have words about it. And I think that I like that characterization as well, like this idea, I don't know, just keep coming back to this place of really relating and understanding that character of somebody who's always been a bit too much. And it was really lovely to see how many people loved Hyacinth, not necessarily even in spite of, but because of who she was. Hyacinth has been set up through the whole series as, the person who always has a quip and the wit and the person who always has the last word and argues back. So I think it would have been quite hard to transform her into a romance heroine that would have been acceptable to a lot of readership. But I think she does it really well. And I think she also makes a very pointed commentary at the same time about the idea of who is worthy of being loved and what edges you have to shave off yourself in order to earn that love.
I mean, I agree with you. But one of the aspects of Hyacinth that I kept pushing back against, and it is not something that I had thought about until this read, was that I don't fully understand why she wants to be married and have a family and isn't thinking of a life that is much bigger than that. Like, of any Bridgerton, she's the one that I was like, why isn't she considered an actual genius in something and pushing for further study?
She's a smart one.
I mean, like, I semi joke when I say that, like, if Hyacinth played an instrument, she would play the violin. But, like, I don't understand why she doesn't have, like, a genius skill, inverted commas. And this is, I don't know, I think when I was reading it, I was also in the midst of listening to a podcast called What's Her Name that is about women who've been forgotten by history and who have done extraordinary things. And there was, I can't remember what episode it was, but it sort of felt like it was around about the right time, and it was a very Hyacinth-esque woman. And I was like, shit, like, the fact that there's not actually anybody in the Bridgerton series who, well, Benedict, but, like, yeah, it fascinates me that Hyacinth at 22 looks around and goes, yeah, I just want to get married. I was like, I don't think she did.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because I think that you're right. Hyacinth could have been destined for bigger things than what a woman was traditionally expected at her time. But this is the thing that I think happened to Eloise as well. Like, Violet Bridgerton is set up as, like, the perfect Regency woman, and eventually all of her daughters turn into her.
But at least with Eloise, like, she resisted that change until she was 28, 29. Hyacinth has at 22. Like, and she's even had it modeled for her. So I was like, this is a strange thing.
Though. Like, younger siblings tend to do things younger than their older siblings because they're trying to keep up.
I suppose, like, realistically, her way out of the house is to get married.
And married to the right person who's going to let her go on adventures and not try and rein her in. Like, I think, like, writing in Regency romance, there wasn't a lot that she could do otherwise, really. But her way of winning is that she marries Gareth, who isn't going to try and put her into a box she doesn't belong in necessly. Which, I mean,
yet he does that when he takes her virginity. Yeah, I think she's got such a big personality because she's got 7 doofuses as older siblings, and she had to make her mark on the family. She is big because it differentiated her from everybody else. But I think there's this moment when Hyacinth starts developing self-awareness about halfway through the book, and it's great. But she talks about a few of the guys that had approached her and were a bit challenging to her, but she didn't really like herself when she was with them. And it just sort of made me think of something I've been saying to myself for a couple of years, which is, if you're not experiencing discomfort, you're not learning. And I think that conversation with Violet is vitally important in her developing some of that self-realization and recognizing maybe some of those guys that she met earlier on could have been a match for her. She just wasn't ready for it and wasn't ready to make those compromises with people. A lot of her relationships seem to be entirely just family-centered. That's been her whole life. So it sort of makes sense that her momentum into independence is to create one of her own in some weird, skewed, old-schooly sense.
I really liked that scene with Violet and that self-realization too. That was really, I think that was really lovely. And I liked that it sort of raised that awareness in her that if she ever really wanted to pursue her so-called dreams of being married and having children, that she was going to eventually have to find somebody that she was willing to be vulnerable to.
Yeah.
And that she wouldn't be fully happy unless she met somebody and was vulnerable to somebody who wasn't willing to be walked over by her.
Yeah. Equals.
Yeah, equal. Yeah, it's exactly right. Equals. Somebody who wasn't, and I mean, she could never necessarily, I don't think she could love or respect somebody who was willing to be walked over by her, or, you know, just let her run wild. I think she needed somebody that was willing to I suppose was willing to accept her for who she was, but also set boundaries up that they expected to be respected as well.
A quick question. It's my feeling that Gareth is probably the most attractive of all the heroes in this series. Is that your feeling too?
How do you feel about ponytails?
Oh yeah, he's got a man. No, I was gonna say he's got a man bun, but no, it's only just a little.
There's no bun.
It's just a tiny little.
Just a little ponytail. A little swish,
all
swish.
The more to hang on to, I guess. Yeah.
Like, I don't know. I'm not. I have to admit to not being immune to a good man bun, but I don't know how I feel about like a little tail. Like,
the other discussion that really was unbelievable is that "you saved me" conversation about Hyacinth rescuing Violet in that time, when really you could look at Violet being pregnant when her husband died, already having 7 children, that the 8th child would be a burden. And instead, by Hyacinth being full Hyacinth from the moment she was out of the womb, she saved Violet. And I just thought, you know, she had a hero moment in her first, you know, day of life. And I just thought that was just magnificent that like Violet shared that with her. Why she didn't share that at any point 22 years earlier, I do not know. But I also liked that there was a discussion around Hyacinth not having her father, and that she has this incredibly full life, but you know, and all her memories of him are someone else's memories.
Yeah.
And in the stories, her own memories. I really liked that too. So I think Quinn really earned a lot of moments in this book from a lot of the work in the previous books, for sure. But anytime we've got prime Violet, I'm there.
So for me, Hyacinth and Lady Danbury's relationship really shines in this book. I didn't really think about it until just now, but the Bridgertons don't have grandparents at all. But Hyacinth has Lady D, and she serves as kind of a surrogate grandmother. Like, it is such a wonderful relationship, and it is made nicer by the fact that they are not actually blood related, and that Hyacinth, she has found somebody that she quite enjoys spending time with, who also, Lady Danbury probably does spend a lot of time alone. She's not particularly close to many of the people in her family. And so Hyacinth visits once a week to read a chapter of a book and to also just like chat and make diabolical plans. There's something really sweet about that.
It's like the nice version of Aunt March and Joe from Little Women.
I was going to say, you have to explain that to me because I've never I haven't seen it, and I haven't read it.
I haven't read it.
God.
Not even for Meryl Streep.
Not for no one.
In Little Women, the family is not very wealthy, and they have a rather unpleasant great aunt called Aunt March. And Jo, who is the second born, visits weekly to read to this horrible old lady, Aunt March. And there's a lot of conflict there.
Well, Aunt March is rich, and the other March family is poor, and Jo has to take herself off to visit Aunt March. I mean, every couple of days to get paid as her companion. So Aunt March is making Jo visit her in order to help fund the family's, life, basically, to keep food on the table. But Jo doesn't like going, and Aunt March doesn't particularly like or approve of Jo, whereas that's completely different in It's in His Kiss.
I guess also because this is like, there's not a lot of older people that are in this series in particular, but also like, I guess like romance novels more broadly. Like,
oh, there's always like a really sassy old person usually with a dog who's a busybody as well. So I guess Danbury is a version of something that can be quite present in romance books, but I don't find her annoying like pretty much everybody else that sort of fits that archetype.
I think we learn a lot about Danbury. Like, we learn in Penelope's book that she too was a wallflower, and that she sort of didn't come into her own confidence for a very long time. And we learn an awful lot about her here in Hyacinth's book as well, including the fact that she doesn't have a great deal of time for people who are unintelligent, including people who are,
her own children.
12 of her 13 grandchildren. Oh. But, I mean, there's also that sadness of knowing what happened to Lady Danbury's daughter, who she would have loved even if she was a bit of a dunce. I don't really know that about her. And that she was in such an unhappy marriage.
Yeah.
Before we pivot to that, I just needed to get this out. I'm so sorry. So, if podcasts had existed in this era, I absolutely believe that Hyacinth, Lady Danbury, and Penelope would be making a podcast about Miss Butterworth and the Mad Baron. And, like, no one can convince me otherwise.
It would have been loving and critical.
I know in my heart that, like, Lady Danbury would have bullied the other two into making a podcast with her. Because she definitely does try to convince Hyacinth to write books with her. She's going to come up with... I do love the way that she is prepared to, like... What's the word I'm thinking of?
Manipulate.
That wasn't. I was going to say allocate the workload, which is that she's going to come up with the ideas and Hyacinth will do the writing. Like, I appreciate that, but...
I followed you so far down this path that I'm now imagining Penelope releasing Lady Whistledown as, like, a tiny letter in the style of Pop Bitch.
It'd be very like the Lizzie Bennet Diaries, but Bridgerton.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Do you think Danbury and Violet were in cahoots, or Violet just realized, like, got the gist of where the wind was blowing and just took advantage as well?
I don't think that Violet is... I don't think of her as a savvy matchmaker.
Yeah, I agree. I think Violet is focused on the actual wedding as opposed to the person. And, like, she dismisses people who are unsuitable, of course, but, like, her net is cast so widely. It's basically anybody who would be remotely, acceptable to the family is shoved into the path of whoever is marriageable at any given time.
Mm.
Earlier, I cut you off, Adele, but you started to talk about Isabella. Because we've not talked about the diamond or the diary. Diamonds, sorry, or the diary.
Oh, no, I know. I sorry, I just presumed I got the name wrong like I have every other episode. I read It's in His Kiss last night. It's the third time I read it. I wrote my notes today and wrote Gavin through all my notes instead of Gareth.
I love it so much.
I actually had to cross it out and write Gareth when we started recording. Do you think this book could have worked without the conceit of the missing diamonds? Because the missing diamonds and the journal of Gareth's grandmother are a huge part of this book. Do you think it could have worked without it? Do you think it was necessary? Do you think it was effective?
Look, I think they needed something. They needed a common goal to work towards. I think otherwise they were both so canny about what Lady Danbury was trying to do and so caught up in their own heads about what they wanted out of their lives that they probably could have intellectualized themselves out of it really easily. But having that common goal with like the thrill of intrigue and having to sneak around in the dark, like it was, yeah. I mean, it was an incredibly obvious conceit, but I found it quite charming. And I think that it worked really, really well in terms of giving these two characters a reason to be together alone and recognize each other's strengths, weaknesses, and, you know, their ability to solve problems together and work together, which, I mean, is a very, very not subtle reference to the way that they'll approach their marriage in the future.
Maybe my view of this is skewed by the fact that I'm not good at languages, but the way that she is translating something based on like having learnt a little bit of Italian as a child is just it's why I kept thinking about her needing some kind of like desire for further study or like a career. Anyway,
it kind of makes me sad to think that those finding those diamonds became her life pursuit. But anyway,
the sheer fact that they don't find them is like,
yeah, it is great.
It's actually quite delicious.
Isn't it be crazy? I'm like, no, find them. How are you funding your lifestyle? Your dad left it in terrible debt. Find the diamonds. I was very financially stressed about their situation.
Yeah, that worries him to go away. So the father, thinking his wife cheated on him, which she did, decided to, because he was so involved in legacy, he decided to basically run through all, like destroy his whole estate. And the moment he finds out that his non-son was fathered by his brother, he just like, yeah, I'm not going to go so hard on the destroying the estate anymore because it's still part of the legacy. It's so weird.
Well, I mean,
but I love that he had no real response to being told that his brother was the philanderer.
I mean, I know that they said that Anthony raised Hyacinth's dowry, but I'm like, how big does her dowry have to be to get them out of financial ruin? Like, it would have had to be incredibly sizable. I know. I found the whole diamonds thing. I don't know. I didn't like the fact that they didn't find the diamonds, and I really, really did find it incredibly stressful to think about them having children and like running this estate on no money. And I was like, no, they need to find them so that they can be, you know, financially stable and not have to worry about food precarity or whatever.
Maybe Penelope chipped in somehow because she's real fucking rich.
All of the Bridgertons probably could have chipped in, but like, can you see Hyacinth and Gareth like taking charity? Like, no way.
No. Nope.
No.
Maybe they became professional jewel hunters and like just funded their lifestyle by being Regency cat thieves, which by the way is a book I would read if anybody wants to write that.
Let me tell you what the original plot for this book had been. It was going to be a romantic adventure where Hyacinth got kidnapped accidentally by privateers. And then Julia Quinn was like, it's really hard to have Lady Danbury along for the ride in this, and I would like her to be. So that all got scrapped, and we ended up with the diary.
Yeah, that wouldn't have worked. But though I do see how Gareth could be a bit of a romantic sort of privateer type.
It kind of explains the swishy ponytail.
Yes. Ooh. That wouldn't have worked. I'm glad she tossed that aside.
But yeah, so like that's because apparently Gareth was always Lady Danbury's grandson. So that was always, she was always planning to like connect the families. She just...
Look, if Hyacinth got kidnapped, she'd make the kidnapper's life horrific. Like, she would get tossed overboard before they'd fall in love. So, there'd be a mutiny.
Look, if Gareth is actually a privateer, then I'm no longer worried about their finances.
Did you think there was any risk that Hyacinth or the Bridgertons wouldn't accept Gareth based on the fact that his father wasn't his father? Because he still has the title.
I mean, they accepted Sophie.
Yeah,
And she didn't have a title.
Yeah.
I just thought that was a bit... Nah. But I did love Hyacinth's response to his confession about his father, that she was glad because his dad's a dick. Which is the best response ever, because you're just like, yeah. Oh.
Okay, so do you want to talk about what the Featheringtons? Adele, how about you start?
My big, maybe WTF has Hyacinth in her adulthood displaced Penelope as Danbury's favourite? Because it feels like she has.
I mean, I think that probably they occupy different parts of Danbury's life. Like, women contain multitudes. They can have multiple female friendships. And Hyacinth would have more time to spend with her because she wouldn't have all of the responsibilities of being married and presumably eventually fecund.
I do think that, like, particularly because Hyacinth is still, like we said, like she's not super emotionally intelligent, and Lady Danbury does appreciate
Penelope's
Penelope's ability to have insight into other people. So yeah, I think Kate's right.
Penelope's
like they just
a bit more crafty in her responses too.
I think Danbury likes clever people, and Penelope and Hyacinth are both incredibly clever in very different ways. I think she just likes to surround herself with people who are intelligent companions. Not sticking their heads through fences in Windsor Castle and finding themselves stuck there. My WTF moment. Look, I understand what they were doing with the titles all the way through this series, but I really didn't feel the need to be hit over the head with Cher lyrics in the middle of this book. I like mermaids as much as the next girl, but like I didn't need to have the Shoop Shoop song going through my head as I was reading about parlor conversation in Regency romance. It was a bit much. It was very heavy-handed. And, you know, I accept a fair amount of heavy-handedness in my romance novels, but this was a step too far. A shoop too far, one might even say.
But also, his first two kisses were largely motivated by his father's disdain. So what was she reading into his kiss when the first, yeah.
I feel like Hyacinth was absolutely ripped off both her first kiss and her first penetrative sex experience.
Ready for my What the Featherington?
Yes, tell us, Rudy.
How have we not talked about the Smythe Smith, not musicale, but like fucking Little Bo Peep bullshit? And I realize that's not the right family, but she used to be a Smythe Smith, so like it counts. What the fuck is that scene? Why is it my favorite thing ever?
Do you just imagine Julia Quinn sitting at her computer drinking vodka and giggling to herself while she writes this shit? Because it's fantastic.
Iambic pentameter, Little Bo Peep. Like, what are you?
I love the Smythe Smiths though. Like I love them so much. Like
Sorry, I finally found it in my book. The Shepherdess, the Unicorn, and Henry VIII. An original composition.
Oh.
And then they're like all of them at once. And that
it's like some really shit fanfic.
Adele, it's like the most beautiful fanfic in the fucking world.
Yeah. You say shit fanfic, and I'm like, this is the best fanfic.
No. By shit, I mean train wreck, awesome, bad fanfic. Like, it's hard to look away. Hopefully entertaining. Hopefully it has proper grammar, but you know, it's mesmerizing.
Look, it may be the vodka that I'm drinking out of my Harry Potter mug, but now that we've made this play into a fanfic story, I have followed it down into deep, dark places where that shepherdess gets things that she does not expect from both Henry VIII and the unicorn. So thank you both for the nightmares I'm planning on having tonight now.
You did that to yourself.
I don't think so.
But it's just so, I don't know. It's not intertextuality when they're fake books and plays and stuff, is it? But like, for lack of a better word right now, the intertextuality of these books is a really fun metatextuality. Kate, help me out here.
No, I mean, you can call it intertextuality, not least of which because Julia Quinn has created a graphic novel of Miss Butterworth and the Mad Baron to be released in 2021. So, ba-boom, we in fact have intertextuality now.
I know that we spoke about it previously when we were talking about, you know, Penelope is a writer, Colin. So, and we get sort of snippets of Whistledown, and then Colin is a writer, and we get snippets of his journal. Like, we're supposed to understand that both of them, they're not just writers, they're good writers, like capital G, capital W. And to think about that and not be capital R. But like, it must be so fun, but also quite difficult to be like, now I'm going to write bad writing on purpose. And it has to be so bad that people know it's on purpose.
Well, if you contrast Colin's writing with the Mad Baron writing, it's very different. And then there's Julia Quinn somewhere in the middle of that. So, I mean, it would be incredibly challenging, but I think the series is better for it, for sure.
I mean, how many cliffs does Priscilla hang off of?
I was going to say it's hard to count because sometimes she's just like running for cliffs and it takes a very long time to get there. So is there a writer that we suspect is supposed to be being parodied in those, or is it just like generally like gothic romance of that time?
I mean, your most famous one is Radcliffe. So she was the most popular writer of her day. Contemporary critics called her the mighty enchantress. And she sort of was credited with gaining Gothic fiction respectability in the 1790s. So I think that is probably a nod to Anne Radcliffe, but from all accounts, Anne Radcliffe was actually a reasonable writer. So it's almost like she's referencing Anne Radcliffe, but not Anne Radcliffe, like all of the Anne Radcliffe wannabes who came out sort of afterwards trying to capitalize on Anne Radcliffe in the book. So there's a few levels that she's got going on there.
I know that Northanger Abbey is a parody of Gothic romance.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay, well, here.
But
sorry,
that was very definitely like Jane Austen taking a swing at the Brontes.
Well, Radcliffe was famous for having spawned a large number of lesser imitators of the Radcliffe school. and Jane Austen defined her fiction as a contrast to Radcliffe and writers like her, especially in Northanger Abbey, which was Austen's parody of The Mysteries of Udolpho, which is the Anne Radcliffe novel that I think almost everyone who reads romances has heard of at one point or another. So she was incredibly prolific and popular in her day. So it makes sense that they'd be reading one of the terrible knockoffs of Anne Radcliffe rather than like actually good Gothic romance.
So like one of those things that comes up particularly with, I think, historical romance is really prone to it, of like throwing in a classic literature of some kind so that you understand that this character reads. And I kind of like it is a fake book, or like it's an entirely like fictional book that our characters are reading, because I always, anytime it's like if it's an Austen, if it's Shakespeare, if it's like, there's all these things that you're supposed to kind of, I suspect you're supposed to understand about the character if that's what they're reading. And I guess to some degree we are supposed to understand certain things about Danbury and Hyacinth for having read these books. But it's a more interesting understanding, and it's a more nuanced understanding than if she was reading. Yeah. I was
something
reading
improving and literature.
Yeah. Or even like I was reading something really recently, The Beast of Beswick by an author I forget. And the heroine reads Frankenstein in the midst of it all, and I was like, I get it, cool, but same way.
While you were talking, Rudy, I couldn't help but think about Tessa Dare's Romancing the Duke, and I'm not going to spoil that book, but it's really about the fandom of this sort of this gothic serial that became almost like super fandom, and there's a lot around the world building and the sort of preposterous like nature of that storytelling and the writing of it. So I think it's probably a little bit self-referential in terms of writers sort of, you know, talking about what they do, but in a fun way, but then also commenting on the readership and what they tend to respond to. Like it's all very meta, as you said.
Well, and like, you know, like we've kind of said, they're reading these books that they probably do actually enjoy, but but when they discuss them with each other, they're quite snarky, and there's something quite lovely about it. It is almost like authorial permission to snark about the books you love. And I don't care what Julia Quinn thinks of how we engage with her work, but
that was 100% what I was going to ask.
Yeah, so I don't particularly care one way or the other. Like, I'm wholeheartedly like Death of the Author. If it's out there, it's up for reader interpretation.
So whether it's a book or a film or a TV series, is there something that you watch that you can't help but critique but love critique, etc.? Like for me, One Tree Hill, terrible TV show. I watched all 9 or 10 seasons. It went forever. It is terrible writing. The acting was pretty mediocre, and yet I watched it to the end. So there was something that I loved, and yet if I talked about it, I would talk about everything I disliked about it.
Well, like I'm thinking Grey's Anatomy, although I don't.
It has been good at times, though.
No, I mean that's the thing. Like Grey's Anatomy, I think goes through periods of real brilliance, but then sometimes, just for example, the big disaster is fog, and it's hard to take it seriously entirely. I will defend that show to its death. And also, I think the relationships are so good through it. So I know why I keep watching that show, even though sometimes the big disaster is fog.
So, time now for
What Would Danbury Do?
So this comes from a character in His at Night by Sherry Thomas, which is part of the London trilogy.
Sherry Thomas. I love this book so much.
Sherry Thomas. High pitched.
Sorry. Yes. So, like I said, this letter comes from Alessandra in Sherry Thomas's His at Night. Dear Lady Danbury, I desperately need to get married, and my neighbour seems like a perfect fit. But I'm not sure if I should trap him into marriage. What would Danbury do?
Is this the guy that pretends he's like simple the whole time?
Yes.
In order to like,
I love this one.
And then she desperately needs to get married, so she like starts coming on to him, and he was like, "What is her game?"
And then
like, what is going on?
And so then he, because he's like so incensed that she's determined to make a match of him regardless, that he starts to go overboard with how simple he is. So he starts giving a lecture to her like at the dinner table on like the local family that he thinks that not the local family, a family that shares the same last name as her that he thinks that she might be connected to, and she said, "No, I am not." And so he gives this whole and he kills one person off 3 times in different ways, and he he goes overboard, and she just is like, "Yup, sounds great. No, I've never heard of it." Anyway, what's the advice before I get into why I love this book so much?
Look, I think it's interesting because there's a neat little parallel to Gareth's first betrothal here as well, with this idea of, I mean, here we go. We managed to talk about consent.
How did we not talk about this? How did we not talk about her?
I guess we're talking about it now.
Sorry. Yeah.
But we've managed to loop around to consent yet again. We should call our podcast just Consent in What Would Danbury Do? Because, I mean, with Gareth's first betrothal, he recoils so heavily because he's betrothed to somebody who is mentally disabled and doesn't have the ability to understand. And so I have 2 answers for this question. The first is, in reality, if we are discussing this, then no, this person is not capable of consenting to what it is that you're asking them to consent to. However, in Romancelandia, I would say just double check that he's not pretending in order to be able to be a more effective spy.
Adele?
I have nothing to add.
I will ask.
Just that it sounds like a delicious read.
So, there's a lot of different reasons that I have for why this book. And I also thought quite long and hard about what element of It's in His Kiss I was going to pick up on and look for if you like X, you will like Y.
Mm.
And there was a point at which I was prepared to go full Hyacinth and make 5 different recommendations and just blow up the whole spot. And then I also was a point where at least one of those recommendation topics was Sherry Thomas deserves your respect, and all of her books should be I think is how I put it in my initial notes.
It's really funny. This is one of those books that if somebody says to me, I've just discovered romance novels, give me everything that you've got that's good, this is one of the ones that I put into people's hands. As you say, all of Sherry Thomas's books are worthy of stratospheric respect and adoration. But this one is my favorite, I think, because like those characters are in like super deep, dark places. Like it is a dark book. A lot of Sherry Thomas's books are really dark. But like they're scrambling to survive. But the way that it's put together, there's such hope and optimism and humor in it as well. So it's not angst porn. I think like you recognize the consequences and you recognize how high the stakes are, but it's balanced very heavily with some beautiful characterization and even some humor throughout, which I really love as well. And it's just cleverly done. And I think like the thing is, like when you're dealing with representations of disability in romance, you're walking across areas that have not been handled well in the past. And there's a lot to be said about somebody who is pretending or presenting as having a disability in order to be better at their job, which is certainly worthy of deep discussion. But what I think that I liked best about this book as well is that even when Alessandra was using him as a way of getting herself out of a situation, she was never cruel or mocking. Like she definitely was using him, but at the same time, I think that there was a lot of respect there as well. As, you know, she was going to use him, but she wasn't going to abuse him, which I thought was particularly well handled when it came to that representation. Also, Sherry Thomas is a master, and if you haven't read her yet, then oh my goodness, stop listening to us right now, like right now, and go and do yourself a favor.
That's all for this episode of What Would Danbury Do? We'll be back in a fortnight with the final book of the Bridgerton series, On the Way to the Wedding. In the meantime, you can find us at Twitter and Instagram as @BridgertonPod, or send us an email at bridgertonpod@gmail.com. This episode was recorded on the traditional and unceded land of the Gadigal, Wurundjeri and Bunurong people, and edited by audio producer Rudy Bremer on Gadigal country. Thanks for listening, and remember, WWDD.